My grandfather's family tradition put my 12-year-old brother in the hospital. So I gathered evidence and disappeared on my 18th birthday. A year later, my cousin told me the younger boys were starting to refuse, too. In my family, all the boys had to follow one rule: make your cousin bleed or go hungry for the week. Every Saturday, all the male cousins between ages 10 and 18 gathered in my grandfather's garage. Two boys stepped into the chalk circle. Only the one who made his opponent bleed got to eat dinner for the next 7 days. They called it building brotherhood through suffering. My grandfather started this tradition after returning from Vietnam. "I watched soft American boys die crying for their mothers," he'd say, his glassy eyes sweeping across our faces. "No grandson of mine will be weak." My uncles enforced the rules with pride. Uncle Felix kept a photo album of his fight wins, pages of his cousins' bloody faces from the 80s. So when I turned 10, I spent my birthday standing in the fight garage for the first time, surrounded by cousins nursing fresh and fading wounds. I tried telling myself it wouldn't be that bad, that I could just zone out and pretend it wasn't real. I was wrong. It wasn't just about drawing blood. You had to fight until blood splattered the concrete floor. No medical help until the winner finished their dinner. Winners ate like kings. Losers sat at the same table, empty plates in front of them. Brothers fought brothers. Fathers placed bets. "First fight's always special," Uncle Felix announced, pushing me toward the circle. My opponent, my cousin Mateo, also 10, also terrified. The men formed a wall around us, chanting, "Blood brings brotherhood," over and over. Mateo and I circled each other, neither of us willing to throw the first punch. "Hit him!" my dad screamed. So I did. I hit him until his nose cracked and red drops hit the floor. That night, I ate chicken and rice, while Mateo sat across from me with an empty plate and a towel pressed to his face. The months that followed broke something in all of us. My 12-year-old brother, Lucas, nearly lost his left eye fighting our cousin Ezra. Diego, who used to be the gentlest kid, started fighting dirty, fish-hooking eyes, biting ears. "Gotta eat," he'd say afterwards, spitting blood. By my 15th fight, I'd only won 7 times. Not enough to avoid the hollow gnawing of hunger, but enough to know the sick satisfaction of watching others go without. I hated who I was becoming. And our community was so small, over half the teachers at my school were somehow related to us. They made sure no one asked questions. I knew if I didn't find a way out, my life would collapse. But I kept hoping the problem would solve itself. And one day, it did. We were prepping for the spring play when the drama teacher showed us theatrical blood packets, little pouches that burst on impact with realistic blood effects. That was my light bulb moment. I pocketed a few each day, testing the idea. When Saturday came, I slipped a packet into my hand before stepping into the circle. When my cousin Nico caught me in a headlock, I slapped the packet against my nose until fake blood poured down my face. "Blood on the floor!" Uncle Felix yelled. "Nico wins!" I went hungry, and for the first time, I wasn't angry. I focused on stealing more packets, taught my younger cousins the trick during bathroom breaks. We built a system, choreographed moves that looked brutal but caused no harm. A fake stumble here, a packet burst there. For 3 glorious months, we outsmarted our fathers. We rotated wins based on who needed food most. My little brother started smiling again. We were performers, not warriors. Everything was going perfectly, until my grandfather turned to my cousin's unmarked face after a particularly rough match. "Where are the bruises?" he asked. "How'd they heal so fast?" Silence fell. I kept my eyes on the peas on my plate. We thought he'd drop it. He didn't. The next Saturday changed everything. Strip searches, metal detectors, uncles standing guard inside the circle. When they found blood packets taped inside Tomas's waistband, my grandfather made an example out of him. 3 18-year-olds against 1 14-year-old. Real blood, real screams. Tomas couldn't walk right for weeks. "You're next," my father told me that night. "Fight like a man or I'll
Show you what real brotherhood means." I didn't respond. Just pulled out my phone. I've been recording those fights for 8 months. Every blow, every forced starvation. All of it uploaded to a cloud drive, already shared with CPS and the police. Every word I said was a lie, but none of it mattered. All that mattered was stopping the violence. For good. "We're done bleeding for you," Julian declared. Adrian was already dialing. "Police, we need help at 1847 Oakwood Drive. Ongoing child abuse." The garage exploded into chaos. Grandfather's hands trembled as he reached for Adrian's phone, but my cousin jerked it away and backed toward the door. The distant whine of sirens made everyone freeze. "You're bluffing, boy," Grandfather said. His glass eye locked on me, while the good one darted from window to window. His voice was calm, but his hands betrayed him. My father lunged at me. But Julian and Adrian stepped in front. Julian still had dried blood under his fingernails from our staged fight earlier. "He said this ends tonight, Uncle." His voice steady. I forced myself to hold the lie, even as my throat tightened. "Check your phones at midnight. Everything goes live. 8 months of evidence." My heart pounded like a drum, but I kept my chin up and met Grandfather's gaze. A small gasp came from the corner. Leo had found our 8-year-old cousin, Matthias, crouched behind the tool cabinet, holding his dad's phone, quietly recording everything. The blinking red light was a silent accusation. Uncle Felix snatched the phone from Matthias's small hands, his thick fingers fumbling as he deleted the footage. But Matthias whispered something that drained the color from his face. "I already sent it to Mom." The sirens got louder, then veered off in another direction. Adrian's call had given the wrong address. The room exhaled as one, a breath too loud, too relieved. "Family meeting, in the house, now," Grandfather ordered, regaining his command. He pointed at Diego. "Check the streets, make sure they're really gone. Nobody leaves until we handle this." We filed into the main house like prisoners. The mothers emerged from the kitchen, confusion giving way to horror as they saw the blood on their sons' shirts. They'd known about the fights, maybe turned away, but the starvation? That was new to some of them. My mother's face crumpled when she saw my bruised cheek clearly in the kitchen light. "I thought it was just roughhousing." But her voice cracked under the weight of the lies she'd told herself for years. Grandfather stood at the head of the dining table, the same one that winners ate and losers watched. "Anyone who walks out that door tonight is dead to this family. No money, no support, nothing." 3 mothers were already bundling their children, coats half on, keys shaking in their hands. Aunt Melissa clutched her twin boys close, with both fresh bruises from the interrupted fight. Uncle Tony stepped in front of the door, his frame blocking the way. "No one's leaving until we know what kind of evidence you have. This could destroy all of us." During the tense silence, Julian caught my eye and tilted his phone screen toward me. He'd been recording audio for the last hour. The battery showed 2%. My stomach turned. Our best evidence was dying in his hand. Then, the lights went out. Diego had reached the breaker box. Darkness swallowed everything. Furniture scraped, adults yelled, someone's elbow jabbed me in the ribs as bodies stumbled and collided. "The bathroom window," Adrian whispered. We 5 of us scrambled toward it. We slipped through one by one as the chaos raged inside. We hit the ground running and split up without a word. The younger boys made for my friend Caleb's house, 3 blocks away. Julian, Adrian, and I ran to the 24-hour McDonald's on Main Street. Julian's house was closer, so we tried there first. His mom answered in her robe, eyes lined with worry. Behind her, I caught the outline of Julian's dad in the hallway. "Your grandfather already called," she said, without looking at us. "You need to leave. Now." She shut the door. My phone buzzed nonstop, text after text. Threats from uncles, pleas from mothers, demands from fathers.
hovering protectively on my shoulder. Each message pinging my phone made my hands tremble more. At McDonald's, we had barely placed our order when the manager approached our booth. "Your grandfather called, said you boys are runaways. I'm going to have to call the police." The blinking red light of the security camera above us looked eerily like the one on Matthias's phone. We didn't touch our food. We ran. Out of options, I called Miss Alvarez, my drama teacher. She picked up on the fifth ring, her voice thick with sleep. I explained everything. She agreed to meet us at the school. Something about her tone felt off, but I was too desperate to question it. She was waiting in the school parking lot when we arrived, but she wasn't alone. Principal Hastings stood beside her, arms folded, his eyes narrowed. "Your family's worried sick," Ms. Alvarez said, avoiding my eyes. She'd called them. Of course she had. Half the school staff shared our bloodlines somehow. We bolted through the gymnasium. Leo twisted his ankle trying to clear the chain-link fence, his scream echoing through the empty basketball court. Now we had to slow down, supporting him between us. Dawn broke, but there was nowhere left to go. My bank card was declined at 3 different ATMs. Grandfather had already made his calls. The walls closed in fast. Juliana's phone finally died, taking with it our only surviving recording. On a TV in a store window, the local morning news was running. "Police are searching for several runaway teens from a concerned immigrant family." I recognized her, my grandmother's hairdresser's daughter. "Maybe if we apologize," Adrian muttered, swaying with exhaustion. Domingo's little brother Caleb had joined us in the night. He lifted his shirt, revealing fresh bruises running across his ribs. "This is what happened after you left. Dad gave me a lesson on family loyalty." I made a decision. "I'll go to the police alone. You guys hide." The police station smelled like burnt coffee and something like hopelessness. I had barely started telling my story when I spotted Uncle Felix through the glass partition, filing a missing persons report just a few feet away. The desk officer blinked between him and me, her face tightening with uncertainty. She raised a finger to pause me, then buzzed me into a small interview room that reeked of old cigarettes and disinfectant. 20 minutes passed before Detective Chen entered, holding 2 coffees and a notepad. He slid one toward me, then sat in the cold metal chair opposite mine. His wedding ring tapped the metal table as he flipped open his pad. "So you're saying your grandfather makes you boys box, like a boxing club?" "Not boxing," I corrected, frustration rising. "Fighting, until someone bleeds. If you lose, you don't eat." He rubbed his temples and called in his partner, Officer Berezin. The fluorescent light glinted off the nameplate on her vest. The moment Officer Berezin heard my story, her face hardened into something I'd seen too many times. "Look, kid, old country families have different traditions. My grandfather used to make us wrestle. It's not abuse, it's just their way. You can't call it abuse just because you don't like it." My words fell on deaf ears. Within an hour, they handed me over to Uncle Felix. Granddad chaired the local VFW. He'd loaned money to half the town. Pulling strings wasn't difficult for him. The ride home stretched endlessly. Uncle Felix's hands clenched the steering wheel like a vice as he promised grandfather's forgiveness if only I took it all back. We passed Juliana's house. Their car was gone. The driveway was empty. Back home, grandfather was already in full performance mode, playing the doting elder in his leather armchair, surrounded by uncles and aunts. "Boys fight," he told them all, shaking his head like a weary martyr. "This one just has a vivid imagination. Too much time with those theater folks." The next morning, a social worker arrived. Her name was Miss Patel. She looked exhausted, like she'd been working for a decade without a real day off. She interviewed me, with my whole family in the room. Grandfather sat right beside me, his hand still resting gently on my shoulder.
Onto a stretcher, while grandfather barked orders that no one followed. The men who once stood with their arms crossed and chests puffed out now stared at the floor or backed into corners, uncertain and shaken. Ms. Patel returned that evening, this time with 2 officers. She looked different now, less tired, more focused. Maybe someone had finally listened. They separated us. I sat in the kitchen under bright white lights while one officer asked questions gently without my family hovering beside me this time. My answers were slow, careful, but true. Yes, the fights were weekly. Yes, the losers went hungry. Yes, the adults watched. Yes, my grandfather started it. One by one, the pieces fell into place. Other cousins started to speak up. Caleb, Leo, even Diego. Each voice added weight to the story. Vincent survived. He had a concussion, a fractured cheekbone, and a bruised lung. But he survived. CPS opened an official case. The police launched an investigation. Some adults lawyered up. Others packed bags. Grandfather was arrested a week later, charged with multiple counts of child endangerment and assault. Uncle Felix and Uncle Tony went with him. The garage was sealed off. The circle was power washed clean, but the scars didn't vanish. Juliana's family moved to another state. Luis's mom divorced his father. My own mother stopped wearing her wedding ring. I didn't feel free. Not yet, but I felt something close. On the day I left for college, my mom handed me a small envelope. Inside were 4 photographs, one she'd managed to hide all those years ago. Boys with split lips, black eyes, torn shirts. My cousins, my brother, me. "These aren't for court," she whispered. "These are for you, to remember that you weren't crazy." I keep those pictures tucked inside my journal, not as trophies, as proof. Proof that I wasn't weak. Proof that we weren't lying. Proof that we survived.
Maybe if we acted united, they'd back off. I didn't think it would go this far. He sat beside me on the cold cement, where bloodstains still darkened the floor in patches. The same floor where we'd lost teeth, pride, and pieces of ourselves. That night, I slept in the garage again, under the rafters, beneath old blankets that smelled like dust and silence. I dreamed of shouting, and the circle, and the endless hunger that wasn't just for food anymore, but for truth, for freedom, for someone to believe us. The next morning, I went back to the hospital. Vincent was awake and alone when I walked in. His head was bandaged, eyes glassy from meds, but he gave me a weak smile. "They're going to let me out in a couple days," he said softly. "I need you to tell them. Please, Vincent. They won't listen to me, but they might believe you." He looked away. "I can't. My dad says if I talk, we're out, homeless. My mom's got nowhere to go." "I get it," I whispered, throat tight. I needed to ask." As I turned to leave, he reached out and touched my wrist. "Thank you for trying." Outside the hospital, Patricia found me again. "I pulled your cousin's medical history," she said quietly. "There's enough here to raise questions, patterns over years, but not enough for charges. Not yet. But I believe you." It was the first time anyone had said those words. That night, I went back to the garage and began digging beneath the floorboards. I had no idea what I was looking for. Maybe more lost teeth, maybe evidence no one had thought to destroy. Instead, I found something else. An old camcorder. Dusty, half dead, batteries corroded. I opened it anyway. The memory card inside still worked. The footage was grainy, dated years ago, but it was unmistakable. A young Diego, nose bleeding onto the floor. Julian getting kicked in the ribs while adults stood in a ring shouting encouragement. Even my own 10-year-old face, fists trembling as I stepped into the circle for the first time. I took it straight to Miss Patel. She didn't say anything at first, just watched the video in stunned silence. "This," she finally whispered, "changes everything."
Begun again, quiet and deliberate. Julian had thought the bluff would work, thought if we stood together they'd stop. "I'm sorry," he said, voice barely audible in the cold garage. That's when the truth became undeniable. Grandfather's goal was never just about the fights, it was about control. Total submission until every boy turned 18 and left on his own, too broken to ever challenge the family order. I had 2 more years to survive. I began hiding my documentation in new places: library computers, bus station lockers, public terminal logins with scrambled passwords. Anything away from the house, away from prying eyes. To maintain the illusion and avoid harsher punishment, I had to keep attending the fights as an observer. I sat on an overturned paint bucket in the corner of the garage, silently watching cousins beat each other bloody, memorizing every injury. The younger boys began avoiding me. Grandfather's propaganda was already taking root in their minds, casting me as a traitor, a liar, an outsider. One small victory came when I convinced two mothers to sign their sons up for activities during fight times: piano lessons, soccer practice, small shields of protection. But grandfather caught on quickly and began rescheduling fights at random, Sunday mornings, Wednesday evenings, whenever he pleased. One night my father caught me alone in the garage. He looked weathered, his shoulders rounded by decades of quiet obedience. "I'm saving money," he whispered, eyes darting to the door. "When you turn 18, I'll help you leave. Just survive until then." But survival meant watching 10-year-olds walk into the circle. It meant seeing kids I'd tried to protect turn into fighters. Some cousins now trained on their own, completely indoctrinated. They believed the fight was a rite of passage, proof of strength, of loyalty. All my careful documentation was destroyed when my aunt, volunteering at the library, found it during cleaning. She burned it to protect the family. "I had no choice," she told me later. "My son turns 10 next month. I can't let this fall apart now." The lines kept shifting. As each new boy reached age 10, some clung to me in secret, asking for help I couldn't offer. Others embraced the violence, eager for grandfather's approval. Roberto broke unexpectedly. The fiercest fighter in our generation pulled me aside one night, his face worn and battered. "I'm tired of hurting my cousins, but it's too late for me to stop." Together, we built a new evidence cache. Detailed accounts, names, times, videos, hidden inside an abandoned storage shed near the railroad tracks. I started sleeping there on some nights just to escape the stench of fear in the garage. Three mothers started instituting family dinners during fight times. It gave their boys a reason to miss without suspicion. Grandfather responded by moving fights to unpredictable times. The tradition adapted, the control remained. Watching the youngest cousins changed hurt most. Kids who used to play tag and build forts now practiced takedowns and headlocks in the backyard. They quoted grandfather like scripture. And then, finally, a break. Matthias, the 8-year-old who'd filmed that first night, had kept recording. He showed me a clear video. Grandfather himself beating Domingo during a demonstration, blood flying as he barked instructions about proper form. The camera caught my face in the background, watching, silent. My own complicity, visible, even if forced. My mother found the cache one evening, having followed me to the shed. She stood in the doorway, trembling, her face pale and hollow. "You'll destroy everything," she said. "For what? Your sister's futures depend on him. I've skipped meals to keep the house warm, their tuition, everything. He pays it." Tears streaked down her face, but I didn't move. That night, I made a choice. Survival over justice. For now. I would wait until I turned 18, keep gathering, keep hiding, keep the record for the future. The next fight night, grandfather made me referee. 2 10-year-olds, wide-eyed, one trembling so hard he could barely stand. I stood in the circle, counting the drops of blood on concrete. Complicit. Grandfather smiled from his chair. He knew he had won, for now. Vincent had recovered, but he was different. The head injury left him with occasional migraines, but something else had shifted. He pulled me aside late one night, eyes sharp despite the pain. "I'm recording everything," he whispered. "Really recording, for when we're older, for when we can do something." And just like that, a network began to form. Cousins documenting in secret, whispering plans, coordinating cover stories, building toward a future reckoning. The resistance had returned.
Safety, or at least farther from grandfather's reach. The resistance had gone underground, more cautious, more fragmented, but not defeated. As my 18th birthday crept closer, grandfather made an announcement that sent ice into my bones. "Our prodigal son will receive one final lesson," he declared over dinner. "On his birthday, he fights. Then he can leave with my blessing, or stay with my respect." The implication was clear. One last fight, one final humiliation, one final attempt to break me before I could walk away for good. The cousins whispered about who my opponent would be. Some thought Diego, despite our quiet alliance. Others guessed grandfather would bring in someone from another family branch, someone with no shared history or loyalty. But I knew better. I knew grandfather's brand of cruelty, how he weaponized memory and loyalty. It would be Julian, my first opponent, now my last. A perfect, bitter symmetry. Julian, once my ally, now fully consumed by the system, grandfather's perfect soldier. The evidence we'd collected was hidden all over town, digital files on public computers, written logs in bus station lockers, videos stashed on forgotten phones in abandoned buildings, a fractured archive waiting for its day in the light. But that day felt impossibly far away. I sat in the garage listening to the latest fight echo through the wall, the sick thud of fists on flesh, the hoots and hollers of men reliving their glory days, the silence of the women who'd chosen security over their son's safety. 2 more months until my birthday. 2 more months of watching. 2 more months of documenting. 2 more months of pretending. The chalk circle was waiting, patient, hungry, for one last bloodletting. Sunday morning arrived, part of grandfather's new unpredictable schedule. I watched from the garage doorway as mothers shepherded their boys past quickly, citing urgent church plans. 3 families dodged the fight that day, but grandfather saw every absence, tracking them with his cold, calculating eyes. Diego found me behind the tool shed later. His knuckles were raw, split open from demonstrating grappling techniques on younger cousins. "Your birthday's in 6 weeks," he said, scanning the backyard. "Julian's been training nonstop. Grandfather's coaching him himself." That week, grandfather introduced surprise inspections. He showed up at piano recitals, soccer practices, even school events, calling out family obligations and dragging boys back to the garage. Mrs. Alvarez had to cancel her recital entirely after grandfather stormed in and demanded her students be released. At night, I retreated to the abandoned building, adding to our archive. Diego brought photos of stolen medical records, ER visits, concussions, cracked ribs, years of evidence, each one labeled and dated. We wrapped it all in plastic and buried it under rotting floorboards. 2 younger cousins approached me separately that week. 12-year-old Marcus, terrified about his first fight, asked if the blood packet trick still worked. I had to tell him it didn't. I watched the last shred of hope slide from his face. 8-year-old Elias just wanted to know if the hunger ever stopped hurting. I lied and told him it did. Then grandfather changed the rules again. Winners would now eat in front of the entire extended family, not just their opponents. He wanted the mothers to witness their sons starving, to see clearly what defiance cost. Aunt Elena broke down within 10 minutes, sobbing as she pushed her untouched plate to her son. Grandfather banned her from the next 3 family dinners. Vincent's headaches worsened. He collapsed during a vicious fight between 2 14-year-olds, clutching his head, curled in on himself. The family doctor, grandfather's golf buddy, prescribed pills and recommended less stress. No one dared mention the real cause. Meanwhile, I discovered grandfather had been visiting the school weekly, updating Mrs. Vance on my supposed mental decline. The counselor now looked at me with soft pity, fully convinced by Dr. Brennan's reports that I was an unstable teen with violent delusions. Even some of my teachers received those reports. I saw the way they looked at me, carefully, distantly, like I was fragile, dangerous. Diego's breaking point came 3 weeks before my birthday. Forced to fight his younger brother, he refused to throw the punch that would end it. Neither of them got to eat. That night, Diego packed a bag and vanished. His parents filed a missing person report, but I knew he'd made it to safety. Or, at the very least, away from here.
This time, Diego had made it to his girlfriend's family in Nevada. One less ally, but I was relieved he'd gotten out. Truly out. Meanwhile, the younger cousins were transforming faster than ever. They started meeting after school to train together, forming little fight clubs of their own. 10-year-old Emilio bragged about the secret techniques grandfather had taught him during their private sessions. The tradition wasn't just being preserved, it was mutating. It was becoming self-sustaining. Even without the older generation's control, the boys would carry it on. My mother's weight loss became impossible to ignore. Her clothes sagged off her frame. She'd been giving her food to my little sister for months. When I confronted her, she didn't flinch. 2 more weeks, she whispered. Then you'll be free, and things will get easier. But we both knew that wasn't true. Miguel's secret recordings continued to grow. At 8, he had become our most valuable ally, overlooked, underestimated. His footage now showed grandfather teaching psychological warfare, how to undermine a cousin's confidence before a single punch was thrown. But the footage also showed the other boys, faces that would be implicated if anything ever came to light. Then came the announcement, a family reunion the week before my birthday. Cousins from other states, even ones who'd aged out, were all invited back. It wasn't a reunion. It was a spectacle, a planned humiliation. Grandfather wanted every branch of the family to watch me break. I made one final attempt with the authorities, this time a different precinct, a different detective. Detective Williams had kind eyes. She listened, took notes, asked questions. She seemed to believe me. Then she checked my background, saw Dr. Brennan's reports. Our conversation ended with her sliding a pamphlet across the desk. Mental health resources, crisis lines, support groups. Vincent, still plagued by headaches, began quietly disrupting the fights. He'd position himself to accidentally knock over water bottles or block a blow. Small moments that stopped bigger injuries. Grandfather noticed, but he couldn't prove intent. 3 weeks before my birthday, Julian began his final training. I watched him from the shadows as he pounded the heavy bag grandfather had hung in the garage. He moved like a machine, sharp, ruthless, precise. He wasn't the terrified boy I once fought. He was the perfect enforcer now. He caught me watching once, nodded like a hangman recognizing the condemned. Meanwhile, my father's savings plan had collapsed. Grandfather had begun monitoring the family's finances, demanding to see bank statements first. Any unusual activity triggered questions. My father had managed to stash only $300, nowhere near enough for escape. The reunion came. Cousins in their 20s and 30s returned bearing old scars like trophies. They reminisced about fights and fasts, laughing like survivors of war who'd learned to miss the battlefield. Not a single one condemned the tradition. They had been broken long ago. During dinner, Grandfather stood and raised his glass. "This Saturday," he announced to the room, "our wayward grandson will prove himself. At sunset, the hour of warriors." Julian stood beside him, already in his fighting gear, ready. The message was clear. This was no longer just a fight. It was punishment, public and final. That night I met with Vincent and the handful of cousins who still resisted in secret. We had everything: Miguel's videos, Roberto's photos, years of records, all tucked into caches across the city. But none of it mattered, because exposing the truth would collapse the family's finances. It would strip away the fragile stability holding everything up. We were trapped, caught between survival and justice. The morning of my 18th birthday was thick and gray with humidity. The house buzzed with excitement. Extended family filled every room. Uncles who hadn't visited in years came just for this. Phones were charged and ready. Everyone wanted footage of the final lesson. The garage was decorated like a ceremonial arena. Banners hung from the rafters. Strength through struggle. Brotherhood bonds. Someone had repainted the chalk circle, made it wider, ready for blood. Folding chairs lined the walls. Grandfather had turned it into a show. Julian warmed up in the corner, silent and composed. Grandfather had given him new gloves, lighter ones, designed to cut. Every detail of the fight had been designed to maximize damage. Uncle Felix tested the garage door, locking and unlocking it several times. There would be no running this time.
I made one last check on our evidence stash at the abandoned building. Everything was still there, undisturbed, waiting. Waiting for a day that might never come. Maybe when the younger cousins were older. Maybe when Grandfather's grip finally loosened. Or maybe it would rot there, forgotten, a monument to failed resistance. As sunset approached, the extended family gathered. Mothers clutched their younger children close, whispering soft-spoken explanations about tradition. The men assembled into their ritual formation, this time larger, 3 rows deep, like spectators at an execution. Grandfather sat in a raised chair, positioned just high enough to see everything. His glass eye caught the overhead light as he smiled with cruel satisfaction. "Tonight, we remind everyone what happens to those who challenge this family," he announced, his voice unwavering. "Julian has trained well. He understands honor. He will deliver a necessary lesson." The garage door was locked from the inside. No one would leave until blood hit concrete. I stood inside the chalk circle, feeling the oppressive weight of 40 relatives watching, waiting. Julian stepped in from the opposite side, his muscles tight, every movement honed for damage. The boy who once stood beside me in defiance had become the weapon Grandfather had always wanted. There was no ceremony, no countdown, no bell. Julian struck instantly, sharp combinations Grandfather had drilled into him relentlessly. I blocked, ducked, slipped sideways. I didn't strike back. The crowd grew agitated. Someone shouted, "Make him bleed!" Another yelled, "End it!" Julian's frustration deepened with every failed blow. He'd come ready for a war, but found only refusal. His strikes grew wild, sloppy, his technique unraveled into desperation. Grandfather hadn't trained him for a ghost. Then, amid one especially vicious charge, Vincent acted. A mistake. He stumbled into the water table, sending plastic cups, jugs, and gallons of water crashing across the floor. In the confusion, Julian's foot slipped. His momentum carried him down hard. His elbow cracked against the soaked concrete. Blood poured. The room froze. It was blood. Real. Visible. But it hadn't come from a punch. Grandfather rose slowly from his seat, face flushed purple with fury. But the rules had been stated too many times to bend them now, not without shattering the entire illusion of order he had built. The fight was over. Julian stared at his bleeding arm, stunned. I reached down, helped him to his feet, whispered, "I'm sorry." He didn't answer. The crowd dispersed awkwardly, unsure of what had just happened. The ceremony Grandfather had orchestrated so carefully had collapsed into a farce. At dinner,
I ate while Julian sat silently, his plate untouched, his arm bandaged. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Grandfather's chosen enforcer, beaten by his own momentum, by water, by circumstance. The ritual was completed, but the illusion was broken. That night, Grandfather called me into his study. He sat behind his desk, hunched and weathered, looking every bit of his 78 years. His hands trembled, and for once, he made no effort to hide it. "You won without winning," he said, low, worn. "Get out. Take nothing. Never come back."